Today we're going to read the Appeal of the Cherokee Nation in Your Voices of Freedom. It's the 1830 appeal of the Cherokee tribe from Georgia. Had been in North Carolina as well, kind of in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And they're petitioning Congress for relief, basically to protect themselves from being removed. So we're gonna read right through this, thinking about, of course, the ABCs, right? The audience is Congress, and by extension, the American people. I mean, they're trying to make their case as persuasively as possible to the American people to say, look, we have rights here, natural rights just like you have, and we should be able to stay in our land. Of course, the context for this is removal, Indian removal. Jackson is in office now. It's 1830. He is a notorious Indian hater, an Indian fighter. That's how he made his name, even before the famous Battle of New Orleans, where he established a national reputation. He'd establish a regional reputation as an Indian fighter. He battled the Red Stick Creeks as part of the War of 1812. He was widely known to despise Indians, called them savages. Even as president, he referred to them as savages. He had no love for the Indians, and it's part of what made him popular. I mean, to be honest, as the chapter shows, the rise of white democracy, this democratic nationalism, small d democratic nationalism, comes at the expense of non-whites, both Indians and blacks. So part of his popularity rests on this image of him as this rugged frontiersman who's willing to take on the Indians, who are seen as stumbling blocks on the path to progress. Right? We need to remove them, get them out of the way, push them beyond the Mississippi, and then we'll have free access to this land. Or that, as that line in the textbook shows, turn it from Indian, from Indian soil to slave soil. So the Cherokees are petitioning Congress, and of course they have a bias. They want their freedom. They want their land. They want their rights to be protected as the rights of white Americans are protected. So they start off with, it's this classic rhetorical appeal. We're aware that some persons suppose it will be for our advantage to remove beyond the Mississippi, right? Thinking about what your opponents are saying and then responding directly to it. We think otherwise. Our people universally think otherwise. Thinking that it would be fatal to their interests, they have almost to a man sent their memorial to Congress, deprecating the necessity of a removal, right? Trying to show that this is uniformly opposed by the Indian people, because what they know is that sometimes what happens during these treaty negotiations that the American government goes through is that American negotiators will handpick Indian leaders. They'll handpick people who they know will be susceptible to negotiation, who they know will sell out the tribe, and then they'll call that person the leader and let them sign away the tribe's land and then be done with the negotiations. And so what the Cherokee people are trying to do here is indicate very clearly that nobody wants this. If there is a Cherokee so-called leader who claims to want to be removed to Mississippi, they're alone, right? They want to make it fundamentally clear that nobody wants this. This question was distinctly before their minds when they signed their memorial. Not an adult person can be found who has not an opinion on the subject. And if the people were to understand distinctly that they could be protected against the laws of the neighboring states, there is probably not an adult person in the nation who would think it best to remove, although possibly a few might emigrate individually. They recognize that there are always some outliers, but they're really trying to underscore the universality of the sentiment against removal here. There are doubtless many who would flee to an unknown country, however beset with dangers, privations, and sufferings, rather than be sentenced to spend 6 years in a Georgia prison for advising one of their neighbors not to betray his country. Right here, they're referring to some of the state laws that have been enacted over time to try to punish Indians and try to make it impossible for them to stay, or make it so difficult for them to stay that they would choose to flee. And there are others who could not think of living as outlaws in their native land, exposed to numberless vexations, and excluded from being parties or witnesses in a court of justice. Again, making reference to these laws that the state of Georgia has been imposing on the Indian tribe. It's incredible that Georgia should ever have enacted these oppressive laws, to which reference is here made, unless she had supposed that something extremely terrific in its character was necessary in order to make the Cherokees willing to remove, right? See, the only reason you've had to do this is because we are so willing to stay. You've had to create these extremely oppressive laws, and even still we want to stay, right? That shows you how much we love this land. We are not willing to remove. And if we could be brought to this extremity, it would be not by argument, not because our judgments are satisfied, not because our condition will be improved, but only because we cannot endure to be deprived of our national and individual rights and subject to a process of intolerable oppression, right? The only way you can force us out of here is by making it so intolerable for us that we have no choice. Right? We are not going to leave willingly. We have natural rights. And it's interesting that they call it their national and individual rights. I mean, they know the language of the people to whom they're speaking, right? The Cherokee are one of they call them the 5 civilized tribes. And these were 5 southern tribes. Creek, Seminole were a couple of the others. They basically took Thomas Jefferson at his word. Thomas Jefferson, you may recall, advocated assimilation. He believed that Indians were capable of being assimilated into American society, and he thought, well, maybe through education and through a civilization process, Indians could be incorporated and integrated into America. And there were tribes like the Cherokee who did precisely that. They adopted Western clothing. They learned the English language. They created a Cherokee alphabet so that people could learn to read and write in their own language. They bought slaves and owned black slaves. They did all the things that the white Americans around them were doing in an effort to prove how civilized they were. And in a sense, they made a bet that Thomas Jefferson ultimately would be proven correct. And what they find out in the 1830s is that they lost that bet. They took a gamble and they lost, because the Jeffersonian ideal of assimilation gives way to the Jacksonian ideal of complete removal, right? The Jacksonians and Andrew Jackson himself see no place for the American Indian in American society, and so he wants to remove them entirely, no matter how well they can speak English, no matter if they can read and write, no matter if they own slaves. It's immaterial. If they are Indians, they are savages and do not belong. But the Cherokees go on, right? We wish to remain on the land of our fathers. It may sound repetitive, but they're trying to make it abundantly clear. It's like, no matter how much you try to convince yourself that you think we want to leave or it's in our best interest to leave, we know it's not, and we are going to tell you repeatedly, this is not what we want. This is not to our advantage. We have a perfect and original claim to the right to claim this without interruption or molestation. A perfect claim, right? No matter how you gussy it up, we have the right to this land. The treaties with us, the laws of the United States made in pursuance of treaties, guarantee our residence and our privileges, and secure us against intruders. Our only request is that these treaties may be fulfilled and these laws executed. Right? They're trying to sound as reasonable as possible and say, look, it's our right to live here. We have treaties that show this. We have your laws should protect us. Why are they not protecting us? But if we are compelled to leave our country, we see nothing but ruin before us. And again, they know that their opponents are saying, look, it's to your advantage, it's better if you just move out this way. They're saying, no, we know that this would be ruinous. The country west of the Arkansas Territory, and this is basically the Midwest, or the Great Plains, that we would call them now Oklahoma, is where they wound up. The country west of the Arkansas Territory is unknown to us. From what we can learn of it, we have no prepossessions in its favor. All the inviting parts of it, as we believe, are preoccupied by various Indian nations to which it has been assigned. Right? They know that all the good land, if there's any good land out there in Oklahoma, it's all been taken up already by other tribes that either were there before or have been removed there before us, they would regard us as intruders and look upon us with an evil eye. Right? So basically this removal process has thrown together all these Indian tribes with different languages, different customs, different histories, and lumped them all together and basically said, okay, there you go, it's yours. And they know if we come in there as the new kids on the block, nobody else there is going to like us, right? Because we're going to be competing for their land. The far greater part of the region is, beyond all controversy, badly supplied with wood and water. No Indian tribe can live as agriculturalists without these articles. This is important, right? I mean, if the land was really good, the white Americans would want it, right? If the land was fertile and wooded, like in Illinois, the white Americans would covet it, but it's not. It's desolate wasteland, and that's why the Indians are being removed there. They recognize that. Furthermore, the Cherokees are farmers. They're agriculturalists. We have the stereotype in our head that Indians are all riding horseback out on the plains hunting buffalo, and that's not the kind of people the Cherokee were. That's not how they understand how to live. So if they're plopped in this Oklahoma territory, they wouldn't be able to know how to survive. All our neighbors, in case of our removal, though crowded into our near vicinity, would speak a language totally different from ours and practice different customs. The original possessors of that region are now wandering savages lurking for prey in the neighborhood. It's interesting, right? They're, again, using the language of the white Americans, even to describe other Indians. They're using the word savages because they know that's the language that Congress is going to understand. And from the Cherokees' perspective, they feel like, look, we're civilized. We're more like you in Congress than we are like those savages out on horseback on the plains. So listen to us. They've always been at war and would be easily tempted to turn their arms against peaceful immigrants. Right? We would be like sitting ducks here when for these other tribes like the Sioux and other tribes of the plains. Were the country to which we are urged much better than it is represented to be, and were it free from the objections that we have made to it, still it is not the land of our birth, nor of our affections. It contains neither the scenes of our childhood, nor the graves of our fathers. Right? And so, again, they close this appeal and say, it doesn't matter how you frame it. This is not our land. We do not want this. And they take their appeal to Congress. They take their appeals to the court. And it's interesting. The John Marshall Court in their reactions, Fona writes about this a little bit in the book. At first they call in the Cherokee Nation case in 1831 the Cherokees are called wards. Indians are wards of the government, so the federal government has to protect them. Again, it's John Marshall in the Supreme Court trying to assert more national supremacy. He's an old school federalist, John Marshall is, and he wants to assert national supremacy over the state government. He wants to make sure that the state of Georgia isn't trying to take powers that really belong to the national government. The next year, in 1832, in Worcester v. Georgia, he basically sides with the Indians and says, look, they have these treaties that we, as a nation, the federal government, need to abide by. And the line is, and it may be apocryphal, no one's really sure, but the line is that Andrew Jackson says, okay, Mr. Marshall's made his decision, now let him enforce it. And it's interesting because this is the same guy who did enforce national supremacy in the nullification crisis, brought on by his own vice president, John C. Calhoun. But when it comes to Indians, he's basically saying, okay, enforce it. And it really underscores the ultimate powerlessness of the Supreme Court. I mean, the same is largely true today. But the Supreme Court has no army. It has no enforcement mechanism. It has to rely on the executive branch, on the president, to enforce its laws. And this is going to come up to be very important later on in the civil rights movement and in other eras, where a Supreme Court may make a decision that's widely unpopular. How do you enforce it? Well, you enforce it because it has the authority. But in 1832, the Supreme Court is still building its authority, and President Jackson feels free to flout it, at least on this matter. So, your question, what alternatives do you think that the Cherokee had at this point? And what alternatives do you think Jackson had at this point? And then why didn't they pursue those alternatives? So what alternatives did the Cherokee have at this point? What alternatives did Jackson have at this point? And why didn't they pursue those alternatives?